My name is Nell Grant, and at 67 years old, I learned that appearances can be both a shield and a weapon. While the world saw a modest woman in sensible shoes, my bank account told a different story. I never expected my carefully crafted life of quiet success to collide so dramatically with my son Jackson and his new wife Sophia. When your son marries into wealth, you expect some adjustment, but not to be introduced as the family embarrassment. Before I tell you how my billionaire secret was exposed at my own son's wedding, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you enjoy real-life stories about unexpected justice. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where everyone knew your business and judged your worth by your family name. My parents owned a small hardware store that barely kept us afloat. We lived modestly wearing hand-me-downs and clipping coupons. Those early years shaped my relationship with money in ways I never fully appreciated until much later. When I graduated high school in 1975, college seemed like an impossible dream. My parents could barely afford to keep the store running, let alone pay tuition. So I took what jobs I could find, waiting tables at 3 different diners and saving every penny. Within 2 years, I had enough to enroll in night classes at the community college, studying business while working full-time. The 1980s were not kind to women with ambition. I still remember my first job interview at a local bank where the manager asked if I was planning to get pregnant soon because they needed someone reliable. Another potential employer suggested I would be better suited as a secretary rather than in accounts. These experiences hardened my resolve rather than breaking it. By 1985, I had $5,000 saved from years of waitressing. While most saw a small nest egg, I saw seed capital. The early days of personal computing were just beginning, and I recognized an opportunity. I started a small tech support company out of my 1-bedroom apartment, fixing computers for local businesses who were just beginning to adopt technology. That same year, I met Frank. He walked into my makeshift office needing help with his accounting software and left with my phone number. Unlike other men I had dated, Frank never felt threatened by my ambition. He had his own small accounting practice and understood the drive to build something from nothing. Within 6 months, we merged our businesses and our lives. Frank brought structure to my creative chaos. While I could spot technological trends and business opportunities a mile away, he kept our books immaculate and our taxes in order. Together, we expanded from simple tech support to custom software development for small businesses. By 1990, we had 10 employees and had moved into a real office. By 1995, we had 50 employees and were developing proprietary inventory management software that caught the attention of larger corporations. Jackson came along in 1992, our miracle baby, after years of trying. Even with a growing business and a newborn, we maintained our modest lifestyle. We moved to a slightly larger house in a good school district, but nothing flashy. Frank and I agreed that we wanted Jackson to grow up with normal childhood experiences, not isolated by wealth or privilege. The company grew faster than we ever imagined. By 2000, we had offices in 3 states and had developed software being used by major retail chains across the country. We discussed going public, but ultimately decided against it. Public companies meant public scrutiny, and we valued our privacy more than additional capital. Then came 2008. What should have been our best year turned into my worst nightmare when Frank was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim from the start. He fought hard, but cancer fights harder. I lost my husband, business partner, and best friend within 8 months. Grief transforms you in ways you never expect. Some people crumble under its weight. I channeled mine into work not just to distract myself but to honor what Frank and I had built together. Jackson was 16 when his father died, and watching him navigate that loss while I struggled with my own nearly broke me. But we had each other, and somehow we kept moving forward. In the years following Frank's death, I made some significant business decisions. Our software company had become valuable enough to attract attention from major tech corporations. After careful consideration, I sold it for a sum that still seems unreal to me even now. But instead of retiring, I established a private equity firm and began strategically acquiring undervalued companies. I discovered I had a talent for spotting businesses with good bones, but poor management. I would purchase them, restructure, and either sell at a profit or keep them in my growing portfolio. Within 5 years of Frank's death, my net worth had quadrupled. Within 10 years, I had joined the billionaire club, though you would never know it by looking at me or my lifestyle. I maintained the same modest 4-bedroom house in a nice, but not extravagant neighborhood. I drove the same car until it became unreliable, then replaced it with another practical model. I shopped at department stores during sales and continued to clip coupons out of habit rather than necessity. My few indulgences remained private, like funding anonymous scholarships at Jackson's University or making substantial donations to cancer research. Why live this way when I could afford anything? Partly because flaunting wealth attracts the wrong kind of attention, partly because I never wanted money to change who I was fundamentally, but mostly because I had learned that true wealth lies in freedom, not possessions. My financial independence allowed me to make decisions based on values rather than necessity, and that was worth more than any mansion or luxury car. Jackson grew up knowing we were comfortable, but not understanding the true extent of our resources. I paid for his education at Princeton without loans, which he knew required substantial means, but he assumed we were merely upper-middle-class professionals who had saved diligently. I never corrected this impression. I wanted him to develop his own work ethic and values without the weight of enormous wealth influencing his choices. After graduating with honors, Jackson took a job at a prestigious consulting firm in New York. I was proud of him for forging his own path, rather than asking to join my business empire. He visited regularly, calling at least twice a week, and our relationship remained strong despite the distance. Then came the charity gala that would change everything. The irony still makes me smile ruefully. Jackson attended a fundraiser for children's cancer research that I had anonymously funded half the budget for. There he met Sophia Bennett, daughter of Harold and Victoria Bennett, owners of Bennett Hotels, a luxury chain with properties across the country. From the moment he mentioned her name during our next call, I could hear the change in his voice. He was smitten. I was happy for him, truly. But as weeks turned to months, I began noticing subtle shifts in his behavior. Designer clothes replaced his practical wardrobe. Conversations increasingly included references to exclusive restaurants and events I had never heard of. When I asked about his spending, he mentioned bonuses and promotions, and I chose to believe him rather than pry. After all, he was an adult, making his own choices. But deep down, I worried about the influence Sophia and her wealthy family were having on my son, who had been raised with such different values. The engagement announcement came just 6 months after they started dating. Jackson called me on a Sunday morning, excitement bubbling through the phone as he shared that he had proposed to Sophia the night before at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Central Park. The ring, he mentioned casually, had cost 3 months of his salary. Something tightened in my chest at that detail, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was a moment for celebration, not concern. I suggested they come visit me the following weekend so I could meet my future daughter-in-law. Jackson hesitated briefly before agreeing, and that slight pause spoke volumes. When they arrived at my home, Sophia stepped out of their rental car, wearing stiletto heels and a designer outfit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her smile was perfect but did not reach her eyes as she surveyed my modest home. Please understand, my house is lovely, neat, and comfortable. It sits on a 1/4-acre lot in a well-established neighborhood with mature trees and friendly neighbors. But compared to what I later learned was Sophia's childhood mansion in the Hamptons, it must have seemed quaint at best. The weekend visit was filled with small moments that gradually revealed the potential challenges ahead. Sophia commented on how surprising it was that I still worked at my age. When I explained that I enjoyed keeping busy with my small business consulting, she smiled indulgently and said it must be nice to have a little hobby. Jackson shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing to correct her misconception. Over dinner, Sophia spoke at length about her parents, Harold and Victoria Bennett. The Bennett hotel chain was apparently the crown jewel of luxury accommodations on the East Coast. They had properties in New York, Boston, Miami, and were expanding to California. Sophia herself worked in the marketing department, though her position seemed largely ceremonial from her description of her responsibilities. That evening, after Sophia went to bed early, complaining of a headache, Jackson and I sat on the back porch like we used to when he was younger. He seemed eager to know my impression of his fiancée. What could I say? That I worried about the differences in your backgrounds, that her subtle condescension toward my lifestyle raised red flags. Instead, I said she seemed lovely, and that I was happy if he was happy. The relief on his face told me I had made the right choice in that moment, even if it wasn't entirely honest. After they left, curiosity got the better of me. I asked my financial research team to look into Bennett Hotels. The report they delivered was illuminating. Despite the prestigious name and luxury branding, the company was struggling financially. They had overextended during their California expansion, taking on significant debt just before a downturn in tourism. Their occupancy rates were dropping while operational costs soared. They were not in immediate danger of bankruptcy, but their trajectory was concerning. This information gave me pause. Was Sophia aware of her family's financial situation? Were they hoping Jackson, with his consulting background and connections, might somehow help? I pushed these thoughts aside as unfair assumptions, but filed the information away. Nonetheless, over the next few weeks, wedding planning began in earnest. I expected to be included in at least some aspects, but the invitations to participate never came. When I called Jackson to ask about wedding dates and venues, his answers were vague. Eventually, he admitted that Sophia and her mother had everything under control and my input wasn't really necessary. That stung more than I cared to admit. This was my only child getting married, and I was being sidelined before the planning had even properly begun. Still, I reminded myself that the day was about Jackson and Sophia, not about my feelings. If they wanted to handle things their way, I would respect that. My resolve was tested when Jackson called to inform me that they had selected a date just 3 months away. When I expressed surprise at the short timeline, he explained that the Bennett family had connections that made planning easier. He also mentioned with obvious discomfort that the wedding would be at the newest Bennett Hotel in the Hamptons. The same hotel that my research indicated was hemorrhaging money due to low bookings. Around this time, I received another report from my financial team. Harold Bennett was actively seeking investors to inject capital into his struggling business. He had approached several private equity firms, but had been turned down due to the company's debt ratio and questionable management practices. This information triggered my business instincts. Bennett Hotels had good bones, excellent locations, and a recognizable brand. Their problems stemmed from poor financial management and outdated operational practices, areas where my expertise could make a significant difference. I faced a difficult decision. Investing in Bennett Hotels made business sense, but doing so while my son was marrying into the family complicated matters enormously. If I approached Harold directly, he might see Jackson as a convenient connection to my wealth rather than valuing him for himself. If I invested anonymously, I would be withholding significant information from my son and his future family. After careful consideration and consultation with my most trusted advisors, I decided to proceed with an anonymous acquisition through one of my holding companies. The business opportunity was too good to pass up, and I could always reveal my involvement after the wedding if appropriate. I instructed my team to move forward with due diligence for acquiring a controlling interest in Bennett Hotels. Meanwhile, wedding preparations continued without my involvement. Sophia did call occasionally, but her conversations were less about including me and more about critiquing my planned outfit or suggesting I update my hairstyle before the big day. Each call left me feeling more isolated from the celebration. During one particularly memorable phone conversation, Sophia mentioned that her parents were throwing an engagement party at their Hamptons estate. The casual way she added that I was of course invited made it clear the invitation was an afterthought. I thanked her politely and promised to attend, determined to support Jackson regardless of how I was treated. As the engagement party approached, my business team completed the acquisition of Bennett Hotels. Through a complex series of transactions designed to maintain anonymity, my holding company now owned 51% of the business. The paperwork was structured so that Harold Bennett would remain as the public face of the company, while my team would implement necessary financial restructuring behind the scenes. It was a good deal for everyone involved. Harold would keep his position and eventually benefit from improved profitability, while my investment would likely double within 5 years if our projections held true. With this major business decision concluded, I turned my attention to the upcoming engagement party. Despite everything, I was determined to make a good impression and hopefully build a better relationship with the Bennett family. For my son's sake, I wanted to make this work. The Bennett estate in the Hamptons was exactly what you might imagine. A sprawling mansion with manicured lawns that rolled down to a private beach. As my taxi approached the circular driveway, I could see staff directing luxury vehicles to designated parking areas. My sensible sedan stood out among the Mercedes and BMWs like a sparrow among peacocks. The engagement party was in full swing by the time I arrived. Crystal chandeliers illuminated a grand ballroom filled with people in designer evening wear. A string quartet played softly in one corner, while uniformed servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I smoothed the front of my navy blue dress purchased on sale at Nordstrom 2 seasons ago and took a deep breath before entering. Jackson spotted me immediately and hurried over, giving me a quick hug. I could smell expensive cologne and noticed his new designer watch. Before I could comment, he was guiding me toward Sophia and her parents, making introductions with an undercurrent of nervous energy I had never seen in him before. Victoria Bennett gave me a once-over that managed to assess and dismiss me in the same glance. Her handshake was brief, her smile never reaching her eyes. Harold was more genial, though clearly distracted. He excused himself moments after being introduced, pulling his phone from his pocket as he walked away. Sophia kissed near my cheek, careful not to actually make contact. She smiled brightly and said, "We found the perfect mother of the groom dress for you, much more suitable than what you're wearing tonight." Her tone made it clear this was meant as a helpful observation rather than the insult it actually was. Throughout the evening, I was introduced to countless friends and relatives of the Bennett family. Each introduction followed a similar pattern. Sophia or Victoria would mention that I was Jackson's mother, followed by a quick reference to my simple life or modest career, effectively dismissing me, before moving on to more important guests. I caught glimpses of Jackson throughout the night, always surrounded by Sophia's friends, laughing a bit too loudly and drinking a bit too much. When we did speak briefly, he seemed almost apologetic, but offered no real support. Twice I overheard Sophia referring to my sensible shoes when she thought I was out of earshot, eliciting titters from her friends. Despite the discomfort, I maintained my dignity and engaged politely with anyone who spoke to me. One older gentleman, Sophia's great-uncle Arthur, actually provided pleasant conversation. A retired professor, he seemed as out of place in this glittering assemblage as I was, and we found common ground discussing books and travel. The following week, I mailed a check for $50,000 as an engagement gift for Jackson and Sophia. It was a generous amount by normal standards, but still maintained my cover as a modestly successful small business owner who had saved carefully. I included a heartfelt note about how I looked forward to welcoming Sophia into our family. 2 weeks later, Jackson called to thank me, but mentioned that Sophia thought it was cute that I was trying to contribute. They had deposited the check but apparently laughed about how it was just enough to cover the flowers. My gift, which represented what most would consider an extremely generous sum, had been reduced to a cute gesture. I swallowed my hurt and changed the subject. As the wedding date approached, the slights accumulated. I wasn't invited to the bridal shower. The invitation to the bachelorette weekend in Miami came after the event had already occurred, with Sophia calling to say how unfortunate it was that the invitation must have gotten lost in the mail. Dress fittings happened without my knowledge, and I learned about the menu selection from the catering company when they called me by mistake instead of Victoria. Meanwhile, my business team was making significant progress with Bennett Hotels. We had implemented new financial controls, renegotiated vendor contracts, and developed a more efficient staffing model. The changes were already showing positive results, though Harold seemed resistant to some of the recommendations coming from the new investors he thought were just financial partners, not realizing I was actually calling the shots. 2 weeks before the wedding, the acquisition was formally completed. I now officially owned controlling interest in Bennett Hotels, including the luxury property where Jackson and Sophia would be married. The irony was not lost on me, but I kept this information to myself, still planning to reveal everything after the wedding. The rehearsal dinner invitation arrived with just 3 days' notice. The event would be held at an exclusive restaurant in the city, and according to the invitation, business casual attire was expected. I booked a hotel room nearby and selected a simple but elegant pantsuit for the occasion. The night before the rehearsal, I received a call from Jackson. He sounded uncomfortable as he explained that there had been some changes to the seating arrangements. Due to unexpected guests, I would now be seated at table 8 instead of at the family table. He rushed to assure me it was just a logistical issue and not a reflection of my importance. I told him I understood, though we both knew it was yet another way of relegating me to the periphery of his new life. As I packed for the weekend of wedding events, my financial director called with an update. The restructuring of Bennett Hotels was proceeding well, but Harold was becoming increasingly difficult to work with. He had missed several important meetings and seemed distracted when he did attend. More concerning, he had attempted to access company funds for personal use, which our new financial controls had prevented. This behavior suggested he might be under significant financial pressure beyond what we had initially assessed. This information troubled me as I drove to the city. Harold's financial desperation might explain some of the lavish wedding expenditures, a final attempt to maintain appearances despite impending financial difficulties. It also made me question how much Sophia knew about her family's true financial situation. I arrived at my hotel and spent some time preparing myself mentally for the evening ahead. Despite all the slights and exclusions, I was determined to remain gracious and supportive. This weekend was about Jackson and his future happiness. My feelings, however, justified, needed to take a back seat to that priority. With that resolution firmly in mind, I applied a touch of makeup, styled my silver hair into its usual neat bob, and slipped into my pantsuit. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who appeared exactly as the Bennetts perceived me, a modest, unremarkable mother of the groom. They had no idea that the sensible shoes they mocked had walked through boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made, or that the simple jewelry they dismissed could be replaced 1,000 times over with the interest from just one of my investment accounts. But appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes the most unassuming package contains the most surprising contents. A lesson the Bennett family was about to learn in the most unexpected way. The restaurant selected for the rehearsal dinner was exactly what you might expect from a family like the Bennetts: exclusive, expensive, and designed to impress. Soft lighting illuminated abstract art on the walls, while white linen-covered tables were arranged throughout the private dining room. A small string ensemble played quietly in one corner, providing an elegant soundtrack for the evening. I arrived precisely at the time indicated on the invitation, not wanting to give anyone reason to comment on my punctuality. A hostess consulted her list, her eyebrows rising slightly when I gave my name. After a moment, she plastered on a professional smile and led me to table 8, positioned near the back of the room, far from the central table, where I could already see the Bennett family gathering. My table mates were an eclectic mix: 2 elderly cousins of Victoria Bennett, who seemed confused about whose wedding they were attending; a former college roommate of Sophia, who had clearly been relegated to the outer circle; and bizarrely, the wedding planner's assistant. We exchanged awkward introductions and attempted small talk while watching the main table fill with Sophia's immediate family and closest friends. Jackson arrived with Sophia on his arm, both of them glowing. My son looked handsome in his tailored suit, and despite everything, my heart swelled with maternal pride. He caught my eye across the room and gave a small wave, but made no move to come greet me. Instead, he was swept into a round of introductions to Sophia's extended family members, who, unlike me, had been seated at tables close to the main party. As appetizers were served, I overheard Sophia at a nearby table, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch her words. And then his mom showed up in the most tragic pantsuit you've ever seen. I swear it's like she shops exclusively at garage sales. Her friends tittered appreciatively, and I focused intently on my salad, pretending not to have heard. Harold Bennett seemed distracted throughout the meal, constantly checking his phone and stepping away for calls. During one such absence, I noticed Victoria glancing after him with a tight expression before resuming her role as the gracious co-host. The strain in their interaction was visible to anyone paying attention, though most guests seemed oblivious. Midway through the main course, Jackson finally made his way to my table, stopping briefly to place a hand on my shoulder. "I'm glad you could make it, Mom," he said, though his eyes were already scanning the room as if looking for a more important conversation to join. Before I could respond properly, Sophia appeared at his side, her smile fixed in place. "Jackson's mom, right?" she said, as if we hadn't met numerous times already. I was about to respond when she continued, "We're so pleased you could join us even if it was last minute." Her emphasis on the final words made it clear she was reminding me, and anyone listening, that I had not been part of the original planning. I maintained my composure, simply saying I wouldn't miss it for the world. This is an important milestone for Jackson, and I'm happy to be included. The subtle emphasis on included wasn't lost on Sophia, whose smile tightened momentarily before she tugged Jackson away to greet other guests. One of Victoria's elderly cousins patted my hand sympathetically. "They don't make it easy, do they, dear?" Her candor surprised a laugh out of me, and for a moment I felt a genuine connection with this stranger who had also been deemed unimportant by our hosts. As dessert was being served, Harold returned from yet another phone call, his face ashen. He whispered urgently to Victoria, whose expression shifted from annoyance to concern. They conferred briefly before Harold approached the microphone set up for toasts, forcing a jovial expression that didn't reach his eyes. His toast to the happy couple was appropriately effusive, though I noted the slight tremor in his hand as he raised his glass. Whatever business matter had interrupted his evening had clearly been significant. As a series of friends and family members followed with their own toasts, I observed Harold checking his phone repeatedly under the table, his distraction palpable. When the formal toasts concluded, guests began to mingle more freely. I found myself standing alone near a decorative fountain, watching Jackson circulate among Sophia's friends with an ease that both pleased and troubled me. He had always been sociable, but there was something different about him now, an almost desperate quality to his laughter and animation. Victoria approached with a group of elegantly dressed women, clearly close friends or relatives. As they drew near, she made a show of introducing me. "And this is Eleanor, Jackson's mother. She runs some sort of small business consulting thing." The women nodded politely, their eyes already moving past me to more interesting prospects. One of them, however, lingered. "So you're in business? What sort of consulting do you do?" Before I could answer, Sophia joined the group and interjected with a laugh. "Oh, Mom helps people set up like Etsy shops and things. Nothing like Daddy's hotels, of course." The casual dismissal of my career was delivered with such breezy confidence that the women simply nodded and accepted it as fact. I waited for Jackson to correct this mischaracterization, but he merely shifted uncomfortably beside Sophia, saying nothing. The moment stretched, and I realized with a sinking heart that my son was not going to defend me. Whether from a desire to please his future wife or embarrassment about my perceived modest circumstances, he had chosen silence over truth. Something inside me nearly broke at that moment. I had raised Jackson to be kind, to value people for their character rather than their possessions or status. Somewhere along the way, those lessons had been buried beneath his desire to fit into Sophia's world. I considered walking out, returning to my hotel, and perhaps even skipping the wedding entirely. As I contemplated my exit, a server approached with a fresh glass of water. "You're Miss Grant, aren't you?" he asked quietly. When I nodded, he continued, "I just wanted to say thank you. The scholarship foundation you set up paid for my sister's nursing degree. She's working at Memorial now. You changed her life." I was momentarily stunned. My charitable work was done through layers of trusts and foundations specifically to maintain anonymity. This young man recognizing me was both surprising and oddly comforting, a reminder that my true impact had nothing to do with how I was perceived by the Bennetts. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. "That means more than you know." He nodded and moved on professional boundaries, reasserting themselves. But that brief interaction gave me the strength to stay, to hold my head high through the remainder of the evening, despite the continuing subtle, and not-so-subtle slights. As the evening wound down, I made my goodbyes to Jackson, who hugged me briefly and promised to see me tomorrow at the ceremony. Sophia offered another air kiss and a reminder about hair and makeup services being available from 7 a.m. Her tone suggested I would need all the help I could get. I returned to my hotel room emotionally exhausted but resolved. Tomorrow would be challenging, but I would face it with dignity. As I prepared for bed, I checked my email and found an urgent message from my financial team regarding Bennett Hotels. Harold had attempted to withdraw a significant sum from company accounts again, and when blocked by our financial controls had become irate. The situation would need addressing soon, but not tonight. Tonight I needed rest for the day ahead. Sleep came fitfully as I wrestled with conflicting emotions: pride in my son's happiness, hurt at his failure to stand up for me, and growing concern about the family he was marrying into. By morning I had made peace with the situation as best I could. This weekend wasn't about me or even about the Bennetts. It was about Jackson and his future. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same quiet strength that had carried me through building a business empire while maintaining my integrity and values. I dressed carefully in the outfit I had selected for the ceremony, a simple but elegant blue dress that complemented my silver hair and didn't compete with the bridal party. As I fastened my modest pearl earrings, a gift from Frank, on our 20th anniversary, I allowed myself a moment of sadness that he wasn't here to see our son marry. He would have known exactly what to say to make me laugh about the Bennett's pretensions. With a final glance in the mirror, I squared my shoulders and prepared to face the wedding day. Little did I know that the rehearsal dinner had merely been the warm-up for what was to come. The morning of my only son's wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect day for a celebration. While I imagined Sophia surrounded by bridesmaids in a flurry of activity, hairstylists, makeup artists, champagne toasts, and excited chatter, I prepared alone in my hotel room. I had declined the offer of professional styling, preferring to maintain control over my appearance on this important day. As I applied my makeup with practiced hands, my phone chimed with a text from Jackson. "Mom, slight change of plans. The seating chart had to be adjusted again. Check with the ushers when you arrive." I stared at the message, reading between the lines. Another relegation, another subtle push to the margins of this important day. I replied with simple acknowledgement and continued getting ready, refusing to let my hurt show even in the privacy of my hotel room. I arrived at the Bennett Hotel 90 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The grand property sprawled across manicured grounds, its architecture a blend of traditional Hampton style and modern luxury. Ironically, this was now my property, though no one in the wedding party knew that. Security staff and valets greeted arriving guests, directing them toward the garden where the ceremony would take place. When I gave my name, a young usher consulted his list and led me not toward the garden but to a small antechamber off the main lobby. As if sensing my confusion, he explained that immediate family was gathering here before the ceremony. For a moment my spirits lifted at this inclusion, only to be dashed when I entered the room and found it empty except for a hotel staff member arranging glasses on a small bar cart. The young man hesitated. "Mrs. Grant, I believe the Bennetts and the bridal party are in the Magnolia Suite. Would you like me to check if you should join them there?" I declined with what I hoped was a gracious smile. "No, thank you. I'm sure this is where I'm meant to wait. I'll just enjoy a few moments of quiet before the ceremony." He nodded and withdrew, leaving me alone in the tastefully appointed room. Through the windows I could see guests beginning to arrive, elegantly dressed figures moving across the lawn toward rows of white chairs. Flower arrangements in creamy whites and soft blues created a pathway to an elaborate floral arch where my son would soon exchange vows. After 30 minutes of solitude, another staff member appeared to escort me to the ceremony. Rather than being seated in the front row with family, I was directed to a seat in the far back corner, partially obscured by a large floral arrangement. The implications were impossible to miss. I was being hidden away, my presence, acknowledged but minimized. From my position I could see everything: the lush decorations that must have cost a small fortune, the string quartet playing softly as guests were seated, the wedding planner directing her team with practiced efficiency. Harold and Victoria Bennett were greeting select guests, Victoria resplendent in a designer gown that probably cost more than some people's cars. Harold maintained a jovial facade, though I noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Financial stress has a way of manifesting physically, something I recognized from years of business negotiations. The ceremony began with appropriate pomp. Bridesmaids in flowing blue gowns proceeded down the aisle, followed by an adorable flower girl scattering rose petals. Jackson entered from the side with his groomsmen, handsome in his tuxedo, his face a mixture of nerves and joy. My heart swelled with maternal pride despite everything. This was my boy, the center of my world, since the moment he was born. Then came Sophia on her father's arm. Her gown was a masterpiece of design, clearly custom-made and exquisitely fitted to her slender frame. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the assembled guests. Harold's face as he walked his daughter down the aisle showed genuine emotion, perhaps the first authentic feeling I'd witnessed from him. The ceremony itself was beautiful but impersonal. The officiant spoke of love and commitment in generic terms that could have applied to any couple. There were no personal anecdotes, no references to Jackson and Sophia's journey together. It felt staged for maximum visual impact rather than emotional resonance, a wedding designed for photography rather than celebration. As Jackson and Sophia exchanged vows, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Joy for my son's happiness, certainly. Concern about the family he was joining, absolutely. But also a deep sadness that our close relationship seemed to be slipping away, sacrificed on the altar of social climbing and appearance. When they were pronounced husband and wife, I clapped and smiled, along with everyone else forcing back tears that were not entirely happy ones. After the ceremony, guests were directed to a cocktail reception on the terrace, while formal photographs were taken. I moved with the crowd, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. As I sipped the excellent vintage, I observed the photographer organizing family groupings near the ceremony arch. First, Sophia, with her parents, then Jackson. Joining them, then extended family members of the Bennett clan. I waited for someone to wave me over to include Jackson's only living parent in the family photos. The invitation never came. I watched as multiple combinations of family and friends were arranged and photographed my son beaming in every shot, while I remained among the general guests, invisible and forgotten. The deliberate exclusion stung more sharply than any of the previous slights. These were the photographs that would document this day for posterity, and I had been erased from the visual record of my only child's wedding. As I processed this hurt, I overheard a conversation between two of Sophia's friends standing nearby, not bothering to lower their voices. "Can you believe his mother's outfit?" one whispered loudly enough to be heard. "It's like she didn't even try." The other laughed. "I know. And that haircut. Very discount salon. Sophia told me she offered to pay for a proper stylist, but the woman insisted on doing it herself. God, how embarrassing. No wonder they seated her in the back." I maintained my composure, pretending I hadn't heard, but their words burned. My simple, elegant dress had been carefully chosen, my hair professionally cut in a style that suited me. I didn't look out of place among the wedding guests, merely less ostentatious than the Bennett circle. But in their eyes, not flaunting wealth was equivalent to not caring enough to make an effort. The cocktail hour concluded, and guests were directed to the grand ballroom for the reception. The space had been transformed into a floral wonderland with elaborate centerpieces, crystal chandeliers, and a dance floor surrounded by elegantly set tables. A live band was setting up on a stage, and ice sculptures decorated the buffet tables. The cost of this single evening would have funded a small business for a year. I consulted the seating chart and found my name at table 19, positioned far from the head table, where Jackson, Sophia, and both sets of parents would sit. Actually, that wasn't quite accurate. Both of Sophia's parents would be at the head table. I, the lone parent representing Jackson's family, had been relegated to a table shared with distant relatives and what appeared to be a few of the hotel's staff members who had been invited as a professional courtesy. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was an afterthought, an obligation to be acknowledged but not celebrated. As I made my way to my assigned table, I squared my shoulders and lifted my chin. I had built a billion-dollar business empire from nothing. I had survived losing the love of my life to cancer. I had raised a son I was proud of, despite his current behavior. I could certainly survive an evening of social slights from people whose opinions ultimately meant nothing to me. What I didn't know as I took my seat was that the evening was about to take a dramatic turn, one that would permanently alter the dynamic between me and the Bennett family. Sometimes justice arrives in the most unexpected ways, and the tables we think we're assigned to can change in an instant. The reception began with the traditional grand entrance of the wedding party. The band played an upbeat tune as bridesmaids and groomsmen were announced in pairs, each dancing their way to the head table amid applause. Victoria and Harold Bennett were introduced with much fanfare, Harold playing his role as father of the bride with practiced charm, despite the strain evident around his eyes. Finally, the newlyweds were announced as Mr. and Mrs. Jackson and Sophia Grant. My heart caught at hearing our family name attached to my new daughter-in-law, a reminder that, despite everything, this union represented family connection and hopefully eventual understanding. From my distant table, I watched the first dance, the father-daughter dance, and then the invitation for Sophia to dance with her new father-in-law. Since Frank had passed years ago, Jackson danced with Victoria instead. The absence of any acknowledgement of me, Jackson's only living parent, was pointed and painful. There should have been a mother-son dance, but it had been eliminated from the program, another erasure of my role in this celebration. Dinner was served, a multi-course gourmet meal that showcased the hotel's excellent chef. My table mates were pleasant enough, though conversation remained superficial. The Bennett family cousin seated beside me had enough social grace to avoid discussing my obvious exclusion from the main events, instead chatting about her garden and grandchildren. I was grateful for her kindness, a small oasis in an evening designed to minimize my significance. After the meal, when guests had begun to circulate more freely, Harold Bennett approached the microphone. In slightly slurred speech suggesting he had been drinking heavily, he invited everyone to come forward and personally congratulate the couple and meet the family. A receiving line formed quickly, guests eager for their moment with the bride and groom. I hesitated, unsure of my place in this ritual. Would it seem strange for me to stand in line to congratulate my own son? But remaining seated while everyone else participated would appear even more awkward. So I joined the queue, watching as guests ahead of me exchanged hugs and handshakes with the wedding party. When my turn came, Jackson embraced me warmly, whispering, "Thanks for being here, Mom." Before I could respond, Sophia was pulling me toward her parents with a grip on my elbow that was just this side of painful. "And this is Jackson's mom," she announced loudly, her voice carrying to nearby guests. The family embarrassment we're stuck with. There was a moment of shocked silence followed by uncomfortable laughter from those close enough to hear. Jackson looked stricken, but said nothing. His momentary discomfort, apparently insufficient motivation to defend his mother. I felt as though I had been slapped. The deliberate cruelty of the introduction, delivered with a smile, as if it were a joke we were all in on, left me momentarily frozen. All the subtle slights, the strategic exclusions, the whispered comments had culminated in this public humiliation. Before I could formulate a response, Harold Bennett, who had been accepting congratulations automatically while checking his phone, suddenly looked up at me with more focus than he had shown all evening. His brow furrowed as he studied my face. Then his eyes widened in recognition, and all color drained from his face. "Wait a minute," he said, his voice cutting through the awkward moment. "Aren't you Eleanor Grant, the secret billionaire who just bought my company?" The silence that followed was absolute. Nearby conversations halted mid-sentence as people turned to stare. Sophia's smug smile froze and then crumbled into confusion. Victoria's champagne glass paused halfway to her lips. And Jackson, my poor confused son, looked as though the floor had just disappeared beneath his feet. I maintained my composure, meeting Harold's gaze steadily. "Yes, Harold. Nell is short for Eleanor. My holding company acquired controlling interest in Bennett Hotels 2 weeks ago. I had planned to discuss this with you after the wedding, but since you've raised the subject..." Harold appeared unable to process this information, opening and closing his mouth without producing sound. Sophia, however, recovered quickly, her expression cycling rapidly through shock, disbelief, and calculation. "But you live in that tiny house," she blurted. You drive a Honda. You wear off-the-rack clothes. I smiled slightly. Yes, I do. I've found that what you own matters far less than who you are. An expensive lesson, perhaps. By now, a small crowd had gathered around us, guests sensing drama and moving closer to witness it. Victoria Bennett had gone rigid, her social mask cracking to reveal panic beneath. Jackson stepped forward, confusion evident in every line of his face. Mom, what's going on? You bought Sophia's family's company. How is that even possible? I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We should probably have this conversation privately, sweetheart. It's a long story. Harold seemed to be recovering from his shock business instincts overriding social discomfort. He extended his hand toward me, a complete reversal from his previous dismissive attitude. Mrs. Grant Eleanor, I had no idea. The investment group never mentioned. The paperwork didn't indicate. He trailed off, realizing how his words revealed his lack of due diligence. I'd be happy to discuss the business transition in detail next week, Harold, I said calmly. Today is about Jackson and Sophia. I released my son's hand and stepped back, giving him space to process this revelation. A ripple spread through the reception as word quickly circulated. The mother of the groom, so carefully marginalized throughout the wedding, was actually a billionaire business mogul who now controlled the Bennett family's primary source of income. The whispering was almost loud enough to drown out the band, which had resumed playing in a valiant attempt to restore normalcy. Sophia rallied admirably, her social training kicking in as she looped her arm through mine with newfound warmth. We simply must catch up properly, Mother Grant, she gushed. I have so many questions about your amazing career. I gently disentangled myself from her grip. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time for that in the future, Sophia. For now, you should enjoy your wedding reception. You've only got one after all. The subtle reminder of her behavior hung between us, acknowledged but not directly addressed. Victoria appeared at Sophia's elbow, her face a mask of determined charm. Eleanor, you must join us at the family table. There's been a terrible misunderstanding with the seating arrangements. Thank you, Victoria, but I'm quite comfortable where I was seated, I replied. My tablemates have been lovely company. Besides, I wouldn't want to disrupt your carefully planned arrangements. I emphasized the word carefully, just enough to make it clear I understood exactly how deliberate those arrangements had been. As I turned to walk away, Jackson caught my arm. Mom, wait. Did Dad know about all this, I mean? I softened, seeing the genuine confusion in my son's eyes. Yes, sweetheart. Your father and I built the initial business together. After he died, I expanded it significantly. I never discussed the details with you because I wanted you to find your own path, not feel obligated to join the family business or be defined by wealth. But why live like we did, why not? He gestured around at the opulent reception. Because things don't make you happy, Jackson. Relationships do. Purpose does. The satisfaction of earning your own way does. I hoped you'd learn that. He had the grace to look ashamed awareness, dawning of how his recent behavior must have appeared to me. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have. You should dance with your bride, I interrupted gently. We'll talk tomorrow. I patted his cheek, a familiar gesture from his childhood, and moved back toward my assigned table. As I reclaimed my seat, I was aware of how the dynamic in the room had shifted. People who had barely glanced at me earlier now watched with intense interest. Several guests who had previously avoided me now made points of stopping by my table to introduce themselves. The power balance had tilted dramatically, not because I had changed, but because their perception of me had. Harold Bennett approached my table later in the evening, visibly sobered both literally and figuratively. Mrs. Grant, he began formally. I wonder if we might speak privately about the company's future. I regarded him steadily. Harold, today is your daughter's wedding. Business can wait until Monday. But I'll give you one piece of advice for free. True wealth isn't measured by the square footage of your home or the label in your clothes. It's measured by the strength of your character and the quality of your relationships. For a man facing financial strain, you've spent an awful lot today on appearances rather than substance. He flinched as if I'd struck him, then nodded slowly. Perhaps we have some things to learn from each other, he conceded. Perhaps we do, I agreed. Now go dance with your daughter. That's what matters today. As Harold walked away, I felt a curious sense of peace settle over me. The evening had not gone as anyone had planned, least of all me. But sometimes the truth, however, unexpected, its revelation clears the air in ways that nothing else can. The path forward with my son and his new family would not be simple, but at least now we could proceed with honesty rather than pretense. I remained at the reception until Jackson and Sophia made their grand exit amid sparklers and cheers. Then I quietly slipped away to my hotel room, emotionally exhausted, but somehow lighter than I had felt in months. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and hopefully new understanding. But tonight I would rest secure in the knowledge that I had remained true to myself, even when others had not. The morning after the wedding dawned with the weight of unfinished conversations hanging over the day. I ordered room service breakfast and sipped coffee while watching the sun rise over the Atlantic. My phone had been unusually active since the reception with messages from Jackson, Sophia, both Bennett parents, and surprisingly, several wedding guests who suddenly recalled our past business connections. I responded only to Jackson arranging to meet him for lunch before he and Sophia departed for their honeymoon in the Maldives. A 2-week trip to one of the world's most exclusive resorts, another expense that made me wonder how deeply in debt the Bennetts had gone to maintain appearances. The hotel restaurant was quiet when I arrived, most wedding guests having already checked out. Jackson was waiting at a corner table looking tired, but more like himself than he had in months. He stood when he saw me, wrapping me in a hug that felt like coming home. "Mom," he began as we sat down. "I don't even know where to start." "How about with good morning," I suggested, with a small smile. "And congratulations on your marriage." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "The way you were treated yesterday, the way I let you be treated all these months. It's unforgivable." "Nothing between us is unforgivable, Jackson," I replied gently. "Disappointing, yes, but we're family. That doesn't change because of one difficult day or even several difficult months." The waitress arrived to take our orders, giving Jackson a moment to collect himself. When she left, he leaned forward intently. "Why didn't you ever tell me? About the business, the money, any of it?" I considered his question carefully. "When your father died, you were 16. I was focused on keeping our lives as normal as possible while dealing with my own grief. As you got older, I realized that knowing about the family wealth might change your path, your motivation. I wanted you to develop your own work ethic, your own values, without the weight of extreme privilege." "I understand that part," he said. "But even after I graduated, started my career, you let me think we were just comfortably middle class." By then, the habit of privacy was ingrained, I admitted. And frankly, I enjoyed my quiet life. The business world knows me as Eleanor Grant, the somewhat reclusive CEO of Grant Holdings. Almost no one connects that person with Nell Grant, modest widow and mother. That separation has allowed me to live normally, to be valued for who I am rather than what I own. Jackson absorbed this, nodding slowly. "And Bennett Hotels. That's not just a coincidence, is it?" "No," I acknowledged. "When you became engaged to Sophia, I had my team research her family's business. Bennett Hotels is a good company with excellent properties but poor financial management. It was a sound business investment, though I did consider the personal complications." "Does Sophia know about her family's financial problems, I mean?" Jackson sighed heavily. "I don't think so. At least she's never mentioned it. Harold and Victoria maintain the appearance of unlimited wealth very convincingly." Our food arrived, and we ate in thoughtful silence for a few minutes. Finally, Jackson looked up with a troubled expression. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. These past months with Sophia, with her family, I started caring about things that never mattered to me before. Designer labels, exclusive clubs. What people think." He shook his head in evident self-disgust. "I let them treat you terribly because I was afraid of not fitting into their world." "We all lose our way sometimes," I said. "The important thing is recognizing when it happens and finding your path back." "Sophia was so upset last night," he continued. "After everyone realized who you are, she kept saying she'd ruined everything, that you'd hate her forever, and probably fire her dad to punish her. "And what do you think I'll do?" I asked, curious about his perception. He studied me thoughtfully. "The mom who raised me wouldn't do that. She'd be hurt but not vindictive. She'd find a way forward that helps everyone grow." I smiled, feeling a rush of pride in my son's fundamental understanding of my character despite recent events. "That sounds about right. Harold has built a good company. He just needs some guidance on the financial side." The rest of our lunch was easier, reminiscent of our conversations before Sophia entered the picture. We talked about his work, my recent business acquisitions, and memories of Frank. As we prepared to part, Jackson hugged me tightly. "I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry for everything. When we get back from the honeymoon, I want to start fresh. Get to know each other again, all of us." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it despite my reservations about Sophia. "Give me a call when you're back in town." As dessert was being served, Harold returned from yet another phone call, his face ashen. He whispered urgently to Victoria, whose expression shifted from annoyance to concern. They conferred briefly before Harold approached the microphone set up for toasts, forcing a jovial expression that didn't reach his eyes. Together we developed a restructuring plan that would preserve the Bennett brand while implementing more sustainable financial practices. Victoria's approach was less direct. She began with a massive flower arrangement delivered to my home, followed by invitations to charity events and lunch dates. I declined most, but accepted one coffee meeting, during which she alternated between excessive compliments and thinly veiled attempts to ascertain exactly how wealthy I was. I kept the conversation polite but maintained clear boundaries. Sophia proved the most challenging adjustment. Upon returning from her honeymoon, she launched a charm offensive that was as transparent as it was insincere. Her first solo visit to my home was a masterclass in backhanded compliments. "Oh, you've made this place so cozy. I could never manage in such a small space, but you've done wonders with it. And when Jackson told me you were actually rich, I just couldn't believe it. You hide it so well." I neither confirmed nor contradicted her assumptions about my net worth, simply responding with mild acknowledgement of her comments. Her frustration at my refusal to engage with her fishing expeditions was evident but contained. For Jackson's sake, I maintained a polite relationship, always cordial but never warm. The true transformation began gradually about 6 months after the wedding. Jackson had returned to his more authentic self, calling regularly and visiting without Sophia when her social calendar conflicted. During one such visit, he mentioned that Sophia had been asking questions about my charitable foundation. I was surprised, I admitted. "She's never struck me as particularly philanthropically inclined." Jackson shrugged. "She helped organize a fundraiser for her old prep school and seemed to actually enjoy it. Then she found an article about your foundation's work with first-generation college students and kept rereading it." The days following the wedding revelation brought dramatic changes. Harold Bennett requested an urgent meeting, arriving at my office visibly nervous but determined. To his credit, he apologized immediately for his family's treatment of me before getting down to business. Our discussion was productive, with Harold demonstrating more business acumen than I had expected. His problems stemmed not from incompetence, but from overexpansion and poor timing. The day of our visit to the community college, where my foundation funded scholarships for single parents, I observed a different Sophia. She listened attentively as students shared their stories, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely moved by their determination. When one young mother described working 2 jobs while studying nursing, Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Later, over coffee, she made a halting attempt at genuine connection. "I was a real bitch to you," she said bluntly. "Not just at the wedding. From the beginning. There's no excuse, but maybe an explanation." She paused, visibly struggling. "My parents raised me to believe that status and appearance are everything. When I met Jackson, I loved that he was different, more authentic than the men in my social circle. But I was also embarrassed by what I saw as his family's lack of sophistication. My parents." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "No, this is on me, not them. I judged you without knowing you, and I was cruel because I thought I could be without consequences." Her honesty, however belated, was refreshing. I appreciate your candor, Sophia, I said. We can't change the past, but we can choose a different path forward. My relationship with my son and his wife evolved slowly after that day. Sophia began volunteering at one of my foundation's after-school programs initially. I suspected to impress me, but eventually with genuine commitment. Jackson found his footing in his marriage and career, no longer caught between two value systems. We established a monthly family dinner, sometimes at my modest home, sometimes at their considerably larger one, but always focused on conversation rather than appearances. Harold Bennett proved to be a surprisingly adaptable business partner. Once he accepted guidance on financial matters, his talent for hospitality innovation flourished. Bennett Hotels stabilized and began growing sustainably under our joint leadership. Victoria remained, Victoria concerned with social status and appearances, but she tempered her more judgmental tendencies in my presence. A year after the wedding, we gathered for dinner at a restaurant halfway between our homes. As we waited for our entrees, Harold raised his glass in a toast. To Nell, he said simply, "Who taught this old dog some new tricks both in business and in life?" Sophia added softly, "And showed me what real class looks like." Jackson squeezed my hand under the table, a silent acknowledgement of how far we'd all come. The meal that followed was the first that felt like a genuine family gathering rather than a social performance. We shared stories, laughed at Jackson's childhood antics, and made plans for the holidays without any undercurrents of judgment or competition. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The hurt of the wedding had faded, replaced by cautious optimism about our family's future. I had maintained my principles throughout, neither flaunting my wealth nor using it as a weapon even when provoked. My son had found his way back to the values we had instilled in him. And perhaps most surprisingly, Sophia was showing signs of growth and self-awareness I wouldn't have thought possible during our early encounters. True wealth, I had always believed, has little to do with bank accounts and everything to do with how we treat others, especially when we think they have nothing to offer us. The Bennett family had learned this lesson the hard way, but they were learning it nonetheless. And I had been reminded that patience and dignity in the face of poor treatment eventually reveals everyone's true character both to others and to themselves. Have you ever been underestimated or treated poorly based on appearances only to have the opportunity to show your true value later? I'd love to read your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that true worth isn't measured by designer labels or bank balances. Thank you for joining me today, and remember, the most valuable things we possess can never be displayed on a balance sheet.